went to Cairo, Illinois, which is the juncture of Ohio River and Mississippi River. And they said when they got there, they found out that it was worse than Mississippi.
Wow.
And so they thought they better keep on going. And believe it or not, Obama, in his campaign in that part of Cairo, Illinois, told how tough it really was. And is it Senator Durkin from Michigan, sort of verified that it's a pretty tough town. I was the invited speaker for the YWCA of the University of Illinois, and I told that story, and the audience...
In Illinois?
University of Illinois in Champaign-on-Brie.
And you told that story?
And I told that story, and they said, yeah, it's still tough. So I said, and then at the funeral of Metz Rollins, he told of being in a bathtub and a bomb shattering the building and so forth in Cairo, Illinois, and I thought, gee, it's still tough. But anyway, I'm sure it's going to improve in time. But they decided that they would keep on moving. And so they moved to north central Ohio because my father had an uncle there, Uncle Willie, who had been a World War I veteran, and he had served in France. And I remember Uncle Willie because he was the best latrine builder. In those days, we had outdoor toilets, but Uncle Willie learned the technique of building concrete toilets outside, and it's much more sanitary.
This part is censored.
I'm sorry.
No, go on.
Oh, you should hear what I said at the Martin Luther King program in Newburgh, New York, if you think that's tough. Anyway, Uncle Willie was, half a step up the ladder. He resided there for a number of years, and so it was a nice setting for them to settle in. Aunt Liza had many children. They were active in the PTA, and you learn all these things that you accomplish when you go to a different setting. And so I grew up in Marion, Ohio from just at my 8th birthday. I came a few days before my 8th birthday, and this was a great experience. I went through all the change of a rural setting to a suburban setting, and here Marion had been the home of Warren G. Harding. And in this audience, you may be more attuned to the fact that a man named Thomas, who ran for president more than many people except the Baptist leader, was from Marion, Ohio. And that really sort of set the climate and the tone for the kind of community it was. And I attended Warren G. Harding High School. And I was proud of that until one summer I was in Washington, D.C., and we were taking a tour of the White House. And they were pointing out the names and pictures of the president. And when they said Warren Harding, I said, oh, I'm from Marion, Ohio. And the guy looked at me scornfully.
You probably
Well,
being scorned at.
I guess he was all right, but he just didn't have the right kind of friends. The teachers hadn't told us that. But it was a wonderful community to grow up in. I was introduced to the YWCA, or they called it Girl Reserves in those days. And I'm here to tell you that 72 years later, the YWCA is still my passion.
Yay,
And-
YWCA.
And I am very proud to be a part of it. And if you were to go to Google my name, you would see that the first story, I think, is about my having said that the YWCA was a great influence in my life. And it was. It gave me leadership opportunities and growth and challenges and something to sort of rub my elbows against. And they weren't as perfect as I thought they ought to have been, so they had to tolerate my indiscretions and overstatements.
Can I add?
I'm still there.
The McBurney YMCA is like 2 doors down, isn't it?
For whom
Still
is
here?
it named?
Yeah, McBurney.
McBurney.
Yes.
McBurney.
I belong to the McBurney YMCA and I love it.
I loved it when I was there. Oh, what a magnificent,
reason
the
I
YMCA is magnificent.
The reason I asked this is that
She was telling me though about YW.
Yeah, I know, but they're the same kind of,
they
family,
were
aren't
like
they?
Siamese
Right.
twins
Yeah, they're-
until the civil rights movement. And at that point, the people who controlled the budgets of the student movement got impatient, froze the budgets.
Uh-oh.
And so the YM student wise divided, and eventually the emphasis of the women's part was on women and leadership development. The LGBT issue raised its head, and so the men took the triangle and began to emphasize family life and so forth. And so they really are of kindred roots and very much together until the early 60s. But, you know, they're still real friendly. I get every year in November the worldwide guide to a week of prayer that is assembled and put together by the International YMCA. So the roots are still strong, and of course you had people like Lawrence and Mary Rockefeller who were equally committed to the YMCA and the YWCA. And of course all the Rockefeller interests, the Frenches and all the other people whom I've been privileged to know since I've been a member of the National Board since 1964. They threw their money towards strengthening the YMCA.
The first philanthropist.
And it's still with us, you know, it'll probably never break up.
Hey, thank the Rockefellers. I
You
come from a
sound like
rocky
you're from the
town.
Midwest.
No, I'm Armenian.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Oh, do you know how to ululate? Okay. All right.
Censored. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, anyway,
Tell more, tell more.
I gotta have
well,
another.
that's about
hate to
it.
eat
You
work.
can Google my name and see that the YWCA holds a very special and sacred place in my heart.
No, there's
I'm
something-
embarrassed to tell you that I assembled these marvelous placards, photos, blown up, and I got out of the car and left them. They were so beautiful, but maybe they were too large for this small room.
You were
But
bringing them
I
like
do
this.
have other things that I can share with you that will give you a sense of some of the things we've been about. My husband and I married 57 years ago in
Congratulations.
at chapel at Yale Divinity School. I was the second African-American woman to graduate from Yale Divinity School in 1955. My husband, Arthur, no one had ever talked to him about college until the end of the Second World War. He was in a segregated army and had served for almost 4 years. And he was in the pineapple fields of Hawaii, as he tells it. And people started talking about the GI Bill of Rights. So he had taken a half year typing, and in a deprived, poorly educated, segregated army, he was outstanding, and so his officers hid his OCS
Educated
scores
man.
to hold on to him because he was so efficient as an administrator. This gave him the idea that, you know, at the end of the war, that maybe I should be a lawyer.
Nah.
And he wrote to all these law schools telling them that he wanted to enter their law school. And they wrote back saying something about a BA degree. He wondered, what was that? No one in New Rochelle, New York, where he was born. Very affluent community next to Scarsdale that has a reputation of being one of the top high school, public school programs in the nation. No one had ever talked to him about college or that he had a brain. And so he decided that maybe he wouldn't go to college after all, but his minister, who is from Texas, marginal in pigmentation, and he said, well, maybe you could get into my school, Virginia Union. Reverend C.M. Long was highly educated, In fact, one of the saddest stories I know is of his going to graduate school at Drew University, and he had the reputation of being tops in his class, and he was a mature man at that point. And Dr. Long said, the Board of Trustees called him in and said, well, you've embarrassed us because we can't possibly give you the highest honor because the president of our Board of Trustees saw us in the class. And so Dr. Long said, well, I tell you, I will if you publish in all the papers that I am the valedictorian of the class. I just think that was awful. Anyway, but that was the real world. You know, the 40s, I guess it must have been. Dr. Long said
You sit here.
he tried to get him into Virginia Union University,
sit here.
which he did. He graduated the head of his class, and at the end of almost 4 years of college, he had a choice of 4 colleges for law school. Boston University, University of Pennsylvania, Fordham University, and Yale Law. And he finished Yale Law at 36 years of age. We married on the day that I graduated. He had graduated a couple of years earlier. We wanted to be near the ocean since we'd not experienced the ocean together. And the only way we could think of being near the ocean was to work as a maid and butler. So we put an ad in the paper and said, couple, love children, want to be near the ocean for the summer. And about 4 people responded, and one of them was Mrs. Rodney Wilcox Jones of New York. She said they had a summer place in Amagansett, and she'd like for us to come for an interview, and we did. And when we got there, we talked and answered her questions and got to know her. Point with this job opportunity, we had to say, well, we aren't married yet.
Yeah.
and with that, she said, well, maybe we could furnish the orchids for your wedding because their hobby was orchids. So here are these poor people graduating from Yale Divinity School and Yale Law, which they could hardly afford, had all these fancy orchids at this wedding that took place in about 2 weeks. And people wondered, how could they afford all these orchids? And my folks came from, came from Ohio, and it was really great. I lived at International Student Center that year, and we had students from the Middle East, Jordan, South Africa, Mexico, India, Ceylon, Sri Lanka, that is now Sri Lanka. And it was just a wonderful experience. And our wedding was probably one of the most interracial, international weddings that had ever taken place in the Yale community. And when I worked for Planned Parenthood in Rye, a lady came to work at Planned Parenthood very excited because she said, Ralph Bunch's daughter's wedding was in the New York Times. And we said, well, ours was in the New York Times, but there was no photo, so it wasn't history in 1955. But that's just typical of what it was like. You know, you compromised and you worked as a maid butler because that was the only way you could be on an island on this fancy resort area. But it turned out to be a blessing in disguise because there was a wonderful minister who had come from Scotland, a Scotch Presbyterian minister named Gordon. And he was so well thought of by the Presbyterians that they ended up making him dean of the seminary at Princeton Theological Seminary. And as he moved on, his friend George Nicholson and Pat Nicholson, who was equally as dynamic and a Shakespearean actress, came to the community. And Mrs. Jones said to us one day, I understand there's a great preacher at the Presbyterian church. Why don't you take off Sunday mornings and go to church? Well, can you imagine a lady of the house saying, take off and go to church? when her husband drove from New Rochelle, New York, her son flew in from Pennsylvania by plane with his Chinese servant. She did. And we did, and we formed one of the most wonderful, lasting friendships. And as I said, when I was invited to be the speaker when they dedicated the Rosa Parks benches, July before last, that it was so marvelous. Mrs. Jones was a faithful Episcopalian and respected us. Even though she and her husband had no higher education, they did not resent the fact that my husband was a Yale law graduate and I was doing it, and it just didn't matter in our relationship. And we formed a friendship that covered 3 generations and 4 continents.
Yeah.
It's very wonderful.